Hey everyone, my name is Jake from Umbrella IT Services, and today we're going to be speaking with Jaap Siekman about operational and organizational change management so that we can have happier staff, more profitable businesses, and we can have more freedom as business owners. So without any further ado, let's jump into it. And I'd like to give Jaap a big thank you today for coming on and talking with us about operational and organizational change management. So again, Jaap, thank you so much for coming on today. Let's just jump into it. Do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and Transformers Consulting and how you got started in the world of business coaching?
Yeah, Jake, thanks for having me, of course. So my background is in engineering. I got a engineering degree from the Netherlands, and I've worked for about 30 plus years in all kinds of manufacturing and construction environments, in engineering, operations, project management, a lot of exposure to lean or continuous improvement and quality management. And about 4.5 years ago, I decided to change careers a little bit and become a independent business coach. And as such, I work with small business owners in typically blue collar industries. So that is manufacturing, construction trades, cleaning businesses, property management, that sort of types of companies. And I help those owners with changing how they run the business. I focus on the internal workings of the business, which is everything about organization and operations.
Gotcha.
So
So you mentioned that you specialize specifically with blue collar businesses. Are the strategies and the solutions that you put in place applicable only to those businesses, or do you think they would benefit a wider range of small business owners as well?
yeah, that's a good question, and really there is no difference. So any type of business or organization doesn't necessarily need to be a business. They would benefit from the same approach and tools and everything that I use. It's just that I focus or I target the blue collar industries because that's where I have most of my experience, and that's where I separate myself, or I can better separate myself from many of the other business coaches because I speak that language.
That makes a lot
When
of
they are
sense.
talking about all kinds of technical details and inventory and manufacturing or construction, things, I know what they are talking about, and many of my colleagues they don't.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when
Yeah.
you do get contacted by these individuals, these small business owners, what kind of challenges are they usually facing?
Huh. Well, generally the business owner is stressed out. Um, my owners, they do what? Well, the problem that they do not have generally is the sales.
Hmm.
They have the demand. Their problem is to get is on the supply side. They can't get the product or the service out, meeting the demands from the marketplace. Um, and so that has everything to do, with the productivity of the people, the organization as it is structured. It's the processes that are lacking, or there are none of them. It's the quality management. Um, in many cases, the owner wants to grow the business, but the business is so reliant on the owner working in the business that they can't grow. In order for the business to grow further, they would have to now start working 120 hours instead of 100 hours a week. And of course, that's not going to happen. So they need to find another way to organize the business. Some cases, the owner wants to actually work less, less than 80 hours a week, for example, or they want to they're looking at semi-retirement, and it's the same issue. Okay, how do I do that? They don't. So those are some of the issues that my or the owners or my clients they're dealing with. Just to add to that, hiring and retention, massive issue, of course. We can read about it every day in the newspaper. And I have been working with clients where the retention was a massive issue. So all those internal types of issues, that's the clients that I work with.
That makes sense. So I think that's a really common issue that a lot of business owners face. I don't think that's exclusive to the trades at all. Specifically talking about, again, in order to do more work, you need to put more time in because you are the only person, like you are the bottleneck in the business.
Yeah.
So I know personally, I was in that position several years ago, and thankfully I was able to get away from that. And I was able to start working on the business instead of in the business.
Yep.
What are some of the fundamental strategies or resources, generally speaking, that you think a small business owner needs to have in place so they can start to free themselves from those golden handcuffs? So again, I was a technician. Let's use again trades as an example. I was a really good plumber. I was a really good electrician. I was a really good accountant. I was a really good bookkeeper, whatever it is, really good cleaner. And I was so good that I started my own thing on the side. And people were paying me double or triple what I was making working for someone else. And things are going really good. Now I've got enough people where I can actually jump ship. I can start doing my own thing full time. And all of a sudden I find myself, I leave the house at 7 in the morning and I'm getting home at 7 or 8 at night. And I've hired 1 or 2 people. And then again, those people are working 8 hours a day, maybe 9 hours a day sometimes. But anytime the phone rings, I'm the one that has to pick it up. Anytime I get sick, I'm not making as much money. My staff aren't able to function without me. So how do I go from that situation to being into more of an ideal situation where, again, I can be focusing on hiring that next technician, working on developing my business procedures and these other things? Like, what are some of the basic resources, again, solutions, strategies, and other resources that people would ideally have in place so they can make that transition?
Yeah. I mean, basically, the whole scenario that you're describing there is straight from the E-Myth by Michael Gerber. I got it behind me here.
Yeah.
Michael Gerber in the E-Myth, or the entrepreneurial myth, he describes, the way that you are describing it, why a lot of these, startups, fail after, say, 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly because, the plumber starts a plumbing business because they are a great plumber, but many of them, they lack the business skills to actually make it a business. And so a lot of them, they turn into what I call, rather than a business, self-employed with help. It's the plumber, he gets successful, he gets clients, so he hires other plumbers to do some of the work for them, but still they're not building a business. The company is entirely reliant on, him being there and working in the business. And so how to change that? It really starts with the organizational structure, right? So you probably know what an org chart is, or all the listeners here, they know what an org chart is. It's a chart with the president at the top, and then you have positions below that report to the president, positions of people that have a position of accountability.
Yeah.
Every business, basically, they have the same functions. It's like marketing, sales, operations, finance, HR, these days, technology, IT, which is what you do. And you got to have people that take care of those. And a lot of these owners that I was just talking about, and that Michael Gerber talks about, they are not able to delegate accountability, downwards. And so basically they just help, they hire help in those areas, but the owner, they still make all the decisions. And that is a situation where you end up with a business that is extremely busy and that is still fully reliant on your involvement. And so that's one of the components that I start that I start with when I take on a new business or a new client, is to identify the current org chart and then talk about, okay, how can we change this to make something that is more sustainable?
That makes a lot of sense. So once you have it all on the table, you can kind of figure that out. So one thing that I've noticed that I did, and the book that you mentioned, the E-Myth, is literally, everybody needs to read that book 3 or 4 times. That's a life-changing book. Is I basically followed your advice. I laid out my org chart, and then I started to list out the different services that the business provides, and then I kind of figured out what is required to complete those specific services in terms of roles and other resources. That could be recurring tasks, that could be they need a laptop, they need this, they need that. and then you can start to fill those in. So what is your advice to someone that's working 60 hours a week and they're too busy to improve? This is a big issue that we face in IT. People will say, yeah, that sounds like a great solution. I'd love to be able to sit down and build my org chart, Jaap, but I'm already working 60 hours a week. I'm too busy to improve. And I always like to show people the image of the two cavemen, and they're pulling the wagon with the square wheels. And it's like someone with a round wheel shows up and they're like, no, too busy. Can't do that. Busy. Yeah. So yeah. How do you kind of get away from that scarcity mindset and find the time to build out those solutions? And do you think that building an org chart is the very first thing that these people need to do? And then what should they do after that to kind of get the ball rolling?
I love that question, and I know exactly what you're talking about when you describe the guys with the square wheel. There's different types of, or different variations of that. But yes, I do believe it starts with the org chart, because when you have the org chart on paper, and not the way that they think it is, but the way it actually is, it confirms the owner that they are actually the problem.
Yeah.
And it visualizes how they are the problem. If the owner does not have the bandwidth, to make any changes, because they are working 80, 100 hours a week in the business, then my approach has been in some of those cases to identify, well, where is the biggest constraint in all the work that you're doing? Is there one position, for example, that we can hire someone to relatively quickly take over some of your work? So that's one way. In blue collar situations, what is more frequent is that we actually promote some of the technicians, whether it's an electrician or the most experienced plumber or whoever he is, that we promote them into a position of like supervisor or lead hand, and hand over some higher level of accountability or more responsibilities to that person. Generally, in most organizations that I've worked with, there are a couple of guys that have been working with the business for a longer time. They are more mature. They are ready to take on some more work and accountability, and this is actually then an opportunity for them to do that. And so we are helping these guys to be promoted, and to learn new things and to take on more responsibility. And it's the opportunity for the owner to delegate some of the work, so that will free them up and start working on the continuous improvement, or CI. So that's basically the approach that I take. It is important for us to free up that owner, because if we can't and if we don't, then all the efforts are for zip. Nothing will happen. And unfortunately, I have seen a couple of those situations where, despite all the prep work that we've been doing, all the brainstorming and assessments and everything, no major change is happening because the owner is simply not able to free himself up. And that's very, very unfortunate.
Yeah, no, that's the case most of the time. And I think you're right. That is probably why most businesses fail, is that burnout from doing that, because people get stuck in that zone, and then after a year or two it starts to feel hopeless, and then people are kind of cooked. So one of the words you kept mentioning was accountability with staff. Can you explain that a little bit more for folks? Because again, I think that's pretty subjective depending on where you're at as a business owner. So what do you mean specifically by, like, again, I've got a really good person helping me with fulfillment. Like, the way I look at org charts is exactly the way that you laid it out. And to make it even simpler for some smaller folks is, I think, and you can correct me if this is incorrect, but I think that you have fulfillment, you have support, you have sales, and you have marketing. And that's like the core of any business, is those four things. So if I have somebody in my fulfillment sector, again, a technician, and I want to give that technician more accountability, what does that look like? And we can talk about that in the terms of a cleaner, again, an electrician, a plumber, someone that's, if I'm running a sales business, it could be someone that's a salesman. So when you say accountability, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah. Um, you know, the acronym that I quite often bring to the table is RACI, which stands for responsibility, accountability, consulted or consulting, and being informed. Um, I'll leave the last two, for later. The whole thing really starts with the difference between responsibility and accountability, and that in terms of the org chart, but also your processes. So the difference between responsibility and accountability, the way I explain it, is that when you are responsible for a task, you are the one that is expected to do that work. When you're accountable, you are expected to make sure that the work gets done. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you do the work. You can delegate it to your team, people that you supervise. But you are to make sure that it gets done. You own the result. So that's really the difference. And when you look at the org chart, when I mentioned earlier, you got the president, and then you got your operations, which you refer to as fulfillment. You got your sales, you got your marketing, and if the owner tells me that Johnny is accountable for operations, I ask the question, okay, how do you work with Johnny? Do you tell him every morning what he needs to do, or does Johnny have the plan? He knows the mission. He got his people that report to him. He knows what needs to happen overall, and so basically he calls the shot every morning to send the guys out to a job site, make all the arrangements, organize the buying, the inventory, and everything. Which of the two scenarios are true here? And so when the owner says, well, I basically tell him every morning what he needs to do, then Johnny is actually not accountable for operations. He's just responsible. He does what the owner tells him to do. And so in that situation, and that does happen when you are working on that org chart, I actually take Johnny out of that box for the operations, and I put the owner's name in there. And that clarifies that, okay, if we want to change or reduce the workload of the owner, we need to make Johnny actually accountable. So we need to change the way that we supervise him, that we change his role in the whole business, and that he basically ups his game, that he gets a bigger role to play, and he also has the authority to do what he needs to do.
Yeah.
So that's in short, I think, the answer to the question that you were asking there.
No, definitely. And I like that you broke that down, because it kind of sparked one of my experiences. Because for me, I was in that mode for probably 4 years, I think, is how long I lasted. And at that point, I was near burnout. And thankfully for me, I did have a good community. I had a very good friend of mine, Jason, and he was basically struggling with a very similar situation. He runs a duct cleaning company, and it was just him. He was doing great money, 6 figures a year. Anything he wanted, he could have it, and he just didn't have the time for anything. Personal life, work-life balance. And I noticed that he was just probably 2 years ahead of me. He was doing double the income. Everything was going great. He just bought a brand new van for himself. I think it was a 6-figure investment, all these things. And one thing that I've noticed, especially doing what I do now, is that a lot of these entrepreneurs, myself included, are usually hyper independent. And this is less of an issue with the younger people. But what I mean by that specifically is they do not like reaching out for help. And I can do it myself. And I'm my own business owner. I'm not being told what to do by anybody. But what really made the difference for me was recognizing that I couldn't do it myself, and then I needed to reach out to someone like you. And I think the biggest mistake that I made as a business owner was not doing that sooner. And once I did that, I think it took about 12 weeks from me and the coach that I was working with. And then everything was not resolved, but all of that stress and the extra 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week of worrying and just frankly running on a hamster wheel of doing counterproductive work went away, because I had that third party come in. They took a look at what I was doing. And like you just said, they said, well, you're saying that Johnny is responsible for this, but every level of accountability falls back to you.
Yeah.
How is he accountable? And they did that with every avenue of what I was working with. So I have two questions for you, and you can answer them in whatever order you prefer. One is essentially, what are some of the main benefits that you think someone can receive from working with someone like yourself? So again, you get that third party view and all these other things. And the other question would be, how long does it usually take someone when they're working with you? Do you have a 6-week program, a 12-week program, anything like that, where people will actually get their head on straight, they'll get some direction, that anxiety goes away, and they'll actually start to, and again, obviously you can't say they'll start to see results, but they'll start to feel a difference, and they'll be able to, again, get that hope back and get that entrepreneurial energy back. And everyone knows what I'm talking about. When you hit that stride and you're in that flow zone, just day to day, you wake up and work is exciting again, and it feels like the golden handcuffs have kind of been taken off. So again, what are some of the main benefits and the main things that working with someone like yourself, the positive feedback you get from people, maybe 3 to 5 things there, and then how long does it usually take until you start to get that positive feedback from people?
Yeah. I mean, the benefits, with of working with a coach like myself is, I guess, for the owner himself, that he or she gets their life back. I'll just, maybe an example is the best way to go about this. I was working with a business owner. It was a construction company. Guy was working all the time, as we have been talking about. I started working with him, and this was like a year and a half, 2 years later, because we had to. It was a very special situation. Let's put it that way. But at one point, I wasn't getting any responses to my emails, and then suddenly he was there, and he had been on vacation, and so he sent me some great pictures from abroad. I had a great time, and I asked him, it's like, would you have been able to make this trip, like a year and a half or 2 years ago when we started, working together? And he's like, absolutely not. I could have gone, but then upon my return, I would find this massive pile of problems and emails and everything. And he's like, now I got back, I checked in with my team, and they're sort of like, what are you doing here? Because everything is taken care of. His biggest struggle at that point was sort of like he felt like not needed anymore, and that was a bit of a psychological challenge that he had, because he had put a team in place that is running the business for him. And this guy is now exceeding all his goals that we set massively, to a degree where we had to go back to his vision for the business, and basically up that by a factor of like almost 10 in terms of revenue. So one benefit, get your life back, which is massive. From a business perspective, the benefits is all the operational improvements that we are making. Productivity, profitability, so making more money, happier staff, that don't leave the company, so retention, reducing overtime, stress, customer complaints, if that's a factor, all those things. So those are all the benefits that you get from working with a coach. As to your second question, how long this will take, I sort of work in 2 ways with my clients. Either I work with them on sort of like a retainer basis for a couple of hours every week or month, and we slowly go through all the motions. But I also have an 8-week program that I call Roots, Rocks, and Results. It's a 3-step program, takes 8 weeks. And during that time, well, we start off basically with a 2-day retreat. We're not going anywhere fancy. This takes place at your business. And we do a whole bunch of assessments of your current state, your desired future state. We come up with an action plan. And then in the 6 weeks or 7 weeks after, we start implementing some of those things. And so after 8 weeks, you will understand perfectly, all the things that are not right, or that are, all your weaknesses in the business. And you also understand exactly where you want to take your business, so you have clarity about your vision and your goals. And in those 6 or 7 weeks, we will have implemented some changes. In some cases, these changes are actually quite dramatic, as in having a great or big return or effect on the business. In some cases, they're a little smaller and things take a little bit more time. But as just one example, with one client, at the very, very first brainstorm that we did with the management team, I identified that this company was having about $300,000 or $30,000 worth of rework every month, and this is a business that is doing $3 or $3.5 million per year. So that is a massive amount of money that they were throwing away, and the owner was actually not even aware of the magnitude of this problem. We also identified that the cause was very, very simple. And so basically right there, right then, I was able to tell them how to change their process so to eliminate this rework. And so that was basically saving them like $350,000 every year that came straight off the bottom line.
Can you define rework, just for the folks that don't know the jargon?
Of course, this is a manufacturing company that was making products for, let's say, the construction industry, and they would make these products, but then find out that it was not what the client wanted, that they were ordering, and so it got made, and then next day they were told to throw it in the bin. And generally, they could not reuse any of the materials. So the materials, the labor, all that was wasted. And so massive problem that was not properly identified. And the solution, was extremely quick.
Yeah.
So, so basically, in short, the answer to your question, we can see results very, very quickly. My 8-week program will definitely get results, and we'll start making changes, and the company will see, some of those changes happening. And after that, generally we keep working together once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, and basically keep that ball rolling. At some point, it is not so much me, actively looking for change and everything. I sort of become the sounding board for the owner. Jake, you understand, and that the saying is very true of, it's lonely at the top. Mm-hmm. A lot of these owners, they don't have anybody else to talk about their business problems. Not the spouse, not their staff, nobody else. And that's where they appreciate being able to sit with me once in a while and talk about the issues that keep them up at night in a private manner.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Like you mentioned the psychological issues before.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that running a business is probably the most effective therapy that you can have, because it will immediately over the course of years of running your business, it will highlight all of your psychological shortcomings. Like I had a tremendous issue with trust. And after hiring people, you realize incredibly quickly that you need to trust them entirely.
Yeah.
Again, otherwise you can't delegate, you can't assign responsibility, you can't have these other things go on. So I think business coach slash psychotherapist might be a good title. What are some of the
Yeah.
main challenges that you see people kind of dealing with individually? Like you mentioned as well already, being lonely at the top. And I think it's super important that all the small business owners kind of realize that you aren't alone when it comes to things like that. Like, it is very challenging when it's like you can't talk to your staff about it, because then that can affect morale. You can't talk to your spouse or your friends about it because more often than not they're employees and they've never had the experience or the stress and these other kind of things. And it's just a different type of lived experience. And in my experience, it's been tremendously beneficial having someone like yourself for accountability, and also, again, as a sounding board. And again, I'm joking, but as a therapist, where you can, again, have a conversation. You already know of a few other people that are struggling with the same things. And then again, you can kind of build a community out that way. But yeah, what are some of the main psychological challenges you see holding people back, and how do you help people kind of break those down so that they can actually improve themselves and therefore improve their business and then improve the lives of their clients and their staff?
Yeah, it's. I mean, first of all, I am not a counselor.
Of course.
Sometimes, I do feel myself a little bit, being the shrink,
Yeah.
and asking the question, well, how do you feel about this? But jokingly. But let me add that to that there is a lot of counselors out there, and leadership and executive coaches that are focusing more on the person, as a person, where I focus much more on the technology, or of running a business. And but I also believe that in many cases, the psychological problems that a business owner have are made worse, or what is the word? Well, made worse by the business problems that they are having. And so my focus is on solving the business problem for them, which then helps their psychological mindset. But I think the biggest challenge or constraint that the owner has is that they are, by education, they are the plumber. And so they are missing those business skills. And those are things that I help fill in. And that really helps them to overcome all the psychological pressure that they feel for running the business, for their personnel, for the financial situation. And so having a business that runs by itself just provides that massive relief on them, and the fact that they can now take a vacation and go out with the spouse and the kids. So that's sort of like my take on this, that relieving the business stress helps them overcome their psychological challenges.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned that technology is more of your specialty than the counseling. So
yes,
when it comes to technology, like I noticed when I implemented a different platform, so we're using multiple platforms, but in my industry, there's two main ones. They're called PSA tools and RMM tools. That really made things easier for me. Are there any tools that you recommend people use when they're starting to, again, lay out their processes, manage their staff? Like, is there anything they can implement to kind of start themselves out on the right foot? Like, I know there's things like Monday, there's things like Teamwork. Do you have any tools that you recommend, and why do you recommend those technologies?
Yeah, let rewind here, because I mentioned technology. What I really meant with that was the technology of running a business, and helping them change how they manage the business, rather than IT platforms that you are referring to. So let's split this up in the two. If it comes down to for a business owner, and the question, okay, how can I better organize my management practices, the organizational structure,
Like a
the work
process map
processes.
was the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, so one of the things is indeed a process map where we map out every step of the process, the outputs, the IT, or the media that we're using, whether it's an Excel or a Word document, whether it is a platform like Monday or an ERP platform, anything like that. A process map clarifies the transitions from one person to another, which is where a lot of problems occur. And so a process map is a very, very powerful tool to lay out your process and identify weaknesses. So it's one of the components of my my program. The org chart, is one of those tools. In terms of laying out the vision for a business, I use the so-called transformation map. It's a fantastic tool. One page to lay out what your big goal is for the business, for you personal, your BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal. And then from your BHAG, identify basically milestones closer to the now, like 3 years from now, 1 year from now. And once you have that transformation map laid out, it gives you a visual depiction of your vision for the business, and that's something that you can share, with all of your staff. And so whenever your staff is now hearing about certain changes that you want to make and goals and everything, they understand why they are doing it because they understand your vision for the business. So transformation map, org chart, process map, those are sort of three of the key tools that I use. In order to understand better what the management team, but also the staff, thinks about the business, I always do open brainstorms with those two groups. And the open brainstorm is really a question, or about the question, what do you think that we can do better in the business? What do you not like about the business? It's an open brainstorm, no limits in terms of the things that people can bring up. And I absolutely love those discussions. There is always tons and tons of feedback. And at the end of those, you have a really, really good understanding of what both the management and the staff, that's the technicians, let's call it that way, what they really think about the business. And one thing that strikes me is that both parties are sort of complaining about the same things. There is total alignment and understanding of between the two what is wrong with the business, but they're sort of blaming each other or pointing to the other party that they are the problem. And so I always realize that the guys that are working in the shop, that are working on site, they are proud of their job, they are proud of the skills that they have, they want to do a good job, and they hold that the management or the processes are holding them back from doing that. So open brainstorms, fantastic way to identify the shortcomings of a business. So those are some of the core tools that I use with my clients. When it comes down to technology and platforms that you mentioned, the one thing that generally we implement is a tool for the owner and for the business to manage their continuous improvement program. Because what happens when we do all these assessments of the current state of the business, we understand the future state of the business, where they want to be. We get this whole action list of all kinds of projects and tasks that we identify will help the company to get better, and that it becomes a program that needs to get managed. And very often we use, for example, Asana for doing so. But you mentioned Monday as an alternative. There's Jira, Trello. There's all kinds of platforms that will help you with project/task management. And generally, my clients will end up, implementing something like that if they don't have that already. Other common platforms are CRM or ERP, things like Jobber, for example, that will help with organizing the whole workflow, managing clients, and managing projects in terms of actually the actual work that the company is doing.
Yeah. And
So,
again, all those platforms are fantastic, but it's good to know that you're working with Asana. One of the things that I like that you mentioned as well is that it's a one-page solution for certain things. Like for example, I'm a big fan of the one-page marketing plan, and that's something where you basically lay out one of your services and you explain from the initial contact with the client all the way to them referring you business. What are the 9 steps that you're going to take to get them from part A to part B? And you can just lay things out on one page like that. And it's an incredibly powerful tool. And again, this is something where me 9 years ago or 10 years ago, I just didn't know these things existed. But after I started working with someone like yourself, it becomes painfully obvious that these resources are out there. So it's good to know that you have multiple different options like that. So another thing that you mentioned was just laying things out and having them all written out in terms of a funnel or a process map. And we use something called draw.io for that. That's a free tool that everybody can check out. And it's just a free thing. You go on there, you click a button, it makes a square. You click another button, it makes another square that's linked to that one. You can fill it in with details. And before you know it, you again have a map of from the initial contact all the way down to us getting a referral from this client because like the book behind you, they're a raving fan, because again, you are a specialist, you are the best at what you do in your own unique way. They are going to tell other people about you. What does that whole process look like? And once you have it laid out, number one, you benefit from it as a business owner because as a business owner, now you understand what needs to be done. And number two, your staff benefit from it because they understand what needs to be done. And when you have that clear understanding on both sides, I think that frustration that you're talking about where the technician knows what they want to do and how they want to do it, but they feel like management is in the way, and then management knows what results they want, but they feel like the technician isn't doing it the way that they want. When you have that open brainstorming session over a tool like draw.io or the one-page marketing plan or the other platforms you mentioned, a lot of those issues can go away. I think the big struggle would just come down to the question of how am I supposed to fit in that time with my staff to do that? So what are some tips you recommend to people to be able to schedule things like that?
Well, when you're going through a program like this, and you have identified, this long list of stuff that you want to do, start with some quick wins. Identify, the biggest irritants that people have or small irritants that are actually very, very easy to fix.
Yeah.
I mean, because we're talking about change here, and whenever there's change, there's pushback, unfortunately. There is a lot of people, they love change, but there's some people that are, afraid of change. They cannot handle it, can't deal with it, or there are like vested interests, where the change is a threat for their existence. And so we need to overcome that reluctance and that pushback. And, showing right at the beginning that you're serious about the whole program, that you have, brought everybody in, not just to sit there for 2 weeks and talk to an outside consultant or coach, but that you're also actually listening and that you're taking action, then just, take something that is small and change it. So as an example, one team, brought up that the coffee maker had been broken for like 3 months and that it didn't get replaced. So the owner, drove over to London Drugs, bought a coffee maker, put it in the lunchroom. From a business perspective, of course, it's totally irrelevant, but it was just, a show or a sign that, hey, I've listened, you got a new coffee maker.
Yeah.
And of course, you can't leave it with that. You got to follow up with real things. But the involving your whole team in the whole process is important, and then following up quick wins and things that are really bothering everybody, that are irritants, and come up with solutions, and then now know how to enforce those solutions and make sure that they actually work. So there's you may have heard of this, the Deming cycle, or PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's a process where if you have a problem, you analyze, you plan for a change, then you implement that change. That's the do. Then you check, you monitor whether the change is actually working, and if not, you got to modify, change, your solutions. And then if at one point you say, okay, yes, this is working, everybody understands how is this supposed to work, and they are following the new process, then you're like, okay, this is the new process, this is the new baseline. And what I see that often misses is this monitoring, checking phase, where management implements a new process and then they move on to the next, and then this process just falls apart because people don't really understand it. They are reverting back to the old ways because it was easier, and then this, as I said, this new process falls apart, and then the management gets frustrated because, well, they implemented a new process and they're not following it, that new process. Everybody gets frustrated, nothing happens, and so that is a part of for managers to understand what management is. It's not, you cannot just throw this over the fence and then expect it works. You need to nurture all this, and you need to train and mentor your people and follow up on the changes that you are making.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I forgot
what your question was, but these are components of the things that I see, with clients, where some of the change is failing or has been failing in the past, and where owners get super frustrated.
Yeah, and I'm kind of struggling not asking you every question about every struggle that I've had, because it's such a unique thing to each business. But as you're speaking about these things like processes and, again, all these other kind of solutions and these headaches, I'm getting dozens and dozens of examples just in growing my business. I started it with nothing, and now we're doing over 7 figures a year.
Yep.
And that path to get there, like, there's so many, everything you're talking about is exactly what we went through. And again, I think reading something like the E-Myth, working with someone like yourself, that's so invaluable to different staff. Like, as you were talking about, certain people will push back against change. That's going to be, as the E-Myth says, as an entrepreneur, you need to be wearing 3 different hats: the technician, the manager, the entrepreneur. The technician and the manager don't want those changes to happen. The technician wants to just keep working and doing things the way they've been doing it. The manager wants to sort those things into boxes, and the entrepreneur wants to run around and change everything and always be mixing things up and not actually doing any work. So I think balancing those 3 things is really important. And again, I'm trying to avoid just, you say something, it sparks a question, and then I want to ask you about something like, again, like, whoa, what are some strategies people can deal with these things, or how can people deal with these problems? Because there's so many of them. And I think it's just really important that people, again, kind of make a list of what's going wrong day to day, and what their frustrations are and what their staff's frustrations are. And what would you recommend that people do before they reach out to someone like yourself? Like, again, I'm on the hamster wheel, I'm losing my mind, my 1 or 2 staff are in the exact same position. I can tell that there's frustrations with them. We all feel like we're just going through the motions. What are some prerequisites that you would recommend we take so that when we call someone like yourself, we're ready to go? And the reason I say that, again, is because one of the issues that I do want to ask you about, but I'm not going to, would be analysis paralysis. Because I know a lot of small business owners that are one or two people, and I would call the business owner, but I got to do this. Sorry, I would call a business coach, but I have to do this, and I have to do this first, and then I have to do that, and then it's a never-ending list of things that they have to do before they can actually get going. So, what would you say people actually formally need to have in place so that they can have a productive session with someone like yourself?
I would say nothing.
There you go. That's what I wanted to hear.
Yes. Don't think about it, just call me.
Yeah.
Better even, send me an email, because, these days, most of us, we don't answer the call.
Yeah.
But send me an email, connect with me, and, we're going to sit together and talk about your situation and come up with a program. Don't think about it. But I do want to get back to what you mentioned earlier is, you're totally right about, the 3 levels or even 4 levels that a business owner is involved in the business. But, you mentioned staff doesn't want change. And that's actually not what I see, with my clients. So when I do these brainstorms, with the technicians, they want change because they're frustrated. They want to be able to do their job and they can't because of all these reasons. And they understand that the only way to resolve these issues is through change. And so I know what you're saying, and that that's generally the sentiment. That is not my experience. And that's why I like these brainstorms so much, because it does give them, the opportunity, without having the management, in the room or even in the business, to openly talk about everything that they don't like about the business. And, it's always clear that yes, they do want change. So, I don't. So I sort of missed, or don't remember what your question is. That was just a comment. And in terms of, prerequisites, nothing, just call me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I was speaking archetypically about what the book mentions, just the technician wants to put their head down. Like, people are, for the first 6 months, you're super happy to just keep your head down and, dude, I got so much business. I'm making so much money. I can't believe this. I'm my own boss. Da, 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 da. You can just keep going in that mindset. And that's what the technician role is, according to the E-Myth. Speaking in reality, like as you just said, I couldn't agree more. Like, when we come in and we say, hey guys, good news, the Wi-Fi is getting fixed, or good news, you guys are going to be migrated to this new platform, or we're going to implement this new technology, or we're going to change this process up a little bit, our clients' staff lose their minds. It's just, thank God, finally. We've been waiting again, the coffee machine, right? Bringing in the coffee machine, spending the $29 at London Drugs. It's like you're walking in with solid gold bars for people. They absolutely love it. And they deserve it. And again, the staff are what makes the wheels turn, right? And those are the people that you need to be taken care of front and center. And then the customers come after that, in my opinion. Because if your team is taken care of and your team is happy, they're good to go. And I know that's subjective. But my initial question, again, was just to make sure that we kind of got that out of the way, because I know so many small business owners that love to go, not today, I'll do it tomorrow. I have to sit there and I have to have a panic attack for 45 minutes thinking about all the variables before I can actually put one foot in front of the other. And one of the most important things that I've learned as a business owner, and something that I want to make sure the listeners are focusing on, is just do it. Whatever it is, just take the step, move forward with it. If it's a phone call with a business coach, if it's implementing the new tool, if it's hiring your first staff member, just do it. You're going to mess it up. You're going to fall on your face, and that's what you're supposed to do. And then again, hopefully they have an expert like yourself in their corner, and then you can help them fall on their face less and expedite the actual results of the situation. I took the hard way for 4 years, and after I called my business coach up, It took them, like I said, about 12 weeks, and I think it was a 6-week program, and then it was about 6 weeks of individual follow-ups after that. And in those 12 weeks, the business developed more than it had in the previous 4 years. I could say that easily. Yeah. And the reason that happened, again, was thanks to my friend Jason, kind of relaying his experience for me. So again, I would say 100%. Don't think about it. Pick up the phone, contact the person that you think's best for you, and just get that ball rolling, no matter what it is. And when it comes to hiring, because we've talked about that a little bit as well, and it comes to growth, do you have any recommendations for people when it comes to either hiring their first person, hiring their second person? Like, what are some shortcomings and some frustrations that you see people run into, and how can they kind of avoid those pitfalls? And again, that's one of the questions that I wanted to avoid asking, but there's so many like that where I don't want to ask you about individual problems, but I think it would benefit so many people because it's such a common thing to get paralyzed over.
Yeah, I mean, when you're saying, how to hire your first or second person, basically you're talking about self-employed people that start growing their business. That's not a scenario where I'm quite often involved with. But generally, as you know, and also what Michael Gerber says in the E-Myth, when you start hiring your first and your second person, those are generally people that do the technical work. So you're the plumber, you hire another plumber to help you out with the work. Soon after, once you start growing a little bit, you need to start thinking about hiring or delegating work to around other things. It's like the bookkeeping, for example, or some of the HR related tasks. Don't try to do that yourself. Just delegate it or source it out to an outside party. So don't hire an HR manager when you're just 4 people, but source it out to an external party so that you don't need to spend countless hours on inventing the wheel again. Companies that are then growing a little further, we are really start talking about management positions, and so these are the levels of that you mentioned earlier as well with the E-Myth, technical work, management, and leadership. So once you have enough technical work delegated, you need to start looking at delegating the management work. Sometimes you can promote from within. Sometimes it means you need to hire somebody with that skill, with that experience. Yeah,
no, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any resources or any market leaders, anything like that, any books that you recommend people check out so they can continuously learn about things like business coaching, operational and organizational change management?
Well, there's definitely a couple of books that I like, and most of them are behind me as well. Mm-hmm. We talked a lot about the E-Myth here. I like The Goal by Elijah Goldrath. It was the very first business book that I ever read in 1989 or 1990. It's really talking about the theory of constraints. Very, very useful in understanding how to identify your constraints and how to deal with those. Another book that I actually purchased only at the beginning of the year, that's The Supervisor by my local friend here, Hugh Alley. The Supervisor has helped me much better understanding the important role of supervisors and what it means to be a supervisor, also for their managers to understand what the supervisor is. Because once you understand what the supervisor does or is supposed to do, it's the easiest way for the business owner to delegate a whole lot of responsibility and accountability to that person. And so it frees up their life tremendously. And then I guess the fourth book that I could mention is Traction by Gino Wickman, Enterprise Operating System, great insights from another guru, as we can call them, about how to run a business. All kinds of great insights there.
That makes sense. I appreciate that list. I've read a few of those, and they're all tremendous recommendations. How would you recommend someone identify a good quote unquote business coach? Because again, I've been very fortunate. I've never had a misstep in this regard, but I do know some people that have been burned by working with the business coach that is not the best fit for them. So they end up spending a lot of money. They end up wasting a lot of time. Sometimes they've implemented solutions that are just wrong for their business. So what could I do again? I'm ready to pick up the phone. I'm ready to get going. How can I identify the best business coach for me?
Well, I guess it starts with understanding, what your problem is. There is, I don't know how many business coaches out there, and I see them sort of like in three different categories. There is all the guys that are focusing on social or on sales and marketing. So they help business owners grow the business on the revenue side. There's tons and tons of business coaches out there that are like executive or leadership coaches. They focus on you as a person. They're more like, sort of like the counselor type. You know, and then there are the guys like myself that focus on the inside, on the internal workings, the operation, the organizational structure, that sort of things. So
That makes
first
sense.
understand where's your problem. Is your problem on getting more sales? Then find a marketing and a sales coach. If it is you as a person struggling with all kinds of stuff, find a leadership executive coach. And otherwise, find somebody like me. And then, of course, find some of us, have an open discussion, see if their experience matches, your needs, your industry. And do you like the person? Do you think that you can trust them? And do they have the experience? I mean, I see coaches that are like 23, 24 years old. And I'm like, okay, they may have learned the book, but have they actually, can they talk from experience? Probably not. So those are components or aspects that I would say consider.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, that's fantastic. And do you have any like particularly unique kind of struggles that you've seen people go with that you've been able to help them with? Just some examples of anybody in particular that was struggling with a certain situation, and then after working with you, they were able to kind of turn it around. I know you gave us an example of one earlier, but just any other sort of common struggle that you think people might be dealing with, and then what that struggle turned into after going through something like your 8-week program. Just so people, again, I don't want to focus on just negative, negative, not negative. If we can give people a little bit of positive right towards the end of the conversation here, just to let them kind of know this is the kind of result they can expect with this common issue that they're running into.
Absolutely. Maybe I'll touch on two examples. So one complaint or one observation that I hear quite often from staff, sort of like technicians, is like, I don't know who my boss is. I have 3 or 4 different people that tell me what to do every day. And so it's a remarkable observation. And then from the owners or the management side, quite often they tell me, that they don't have an organizational structure in place, and that's one thing that they wanna fix. And so that's relatively simple, going through the motions of writing down the current org chart and then developing an org chart that would be a step up in terms of getting that clarity about who is running what, who is accountable for what the lines of command are, and that will help us grow from the current situation to the owner's BHAG, or Big Hairy Audacious Goal. Another situation was, and this is very specific, it's sort of a manufacturing company, and they had a massive issue with their inventory management. Turned out the inventory was very, very inaccurate. They didn't really know what they had in store. And the result of that was that every time that they would send a work order from the office to the shop floor, people would start picking parts, couldn't find the parts. Now there would be discussions back to sales. Okay, what can we replace this with? Do we have that component? Oh, we got nothing. Now we have to buy it. Now we have to expedite. People were frantically running around getting the parts that they needed to fulfill the order. And so we went through a whole exercise, cleaning up the inventory, implementing ABC items, using color coding, labeling, moving everything to a new place. And at one point, it was sort of like a year later, I had the client on the phone and he was telling me, yeah, it was very interesting because I was in the shop the other day and I was like, there's something wrong because it's so quiet here. And what's going on? And so he went upstairs again, checked the order book, and he's like, we're just as busy as last year, but the difference was that now they would create a work order, give it to the shop would pick the parts, put the whole thing together, ship it out. That was it. No frantic running around anymore. So, massive change, massive benefit, and now they are set up to do 2, 3, 4 times as much revenue with the same people that they have.
I think that's an amazing thing to highlight. Like, it's the exact same thing for us. We're a super small player in the space, but we're doing 3, 4 times what we should be. And people are always blown away. Like, we can do certain services in literally a quarter of the time for 1/10 the cost of our competition. And people are asking, what's the catch? And there is no catch. We actually offer guarantees. So we can do certain things where it's the service induces no downtime, or you get your money back for the entire service, and we do it anyways. And the way we can do that is, again, I used a free tool, draw.io, and I'm sure, again, you have different, much better versions of that, to just lay out my processes. And it just goes, okay, the person calls in, then we do the qualification call, then we do this, then we do that. 3 or 4 steps later, wow, they're sending us referrals. And then we start the whole thing over again. And because it's all laid out like that, you don't have this issue of who's responsible for what, who do I need to call for my workload for the day, and all the kind of issues that you mentioned. So I think you made some really, really good points on how to build a resilient and adaptable business model, using things like an org chart, like a process map, the RACI strategy you mentioned before. You mentioned a couple other ones as well. So I think this has been a tremendously beneficial conversation. Do you have anything specifically that you wanted to cover before we start to wrap up?
No, I think we have covered a lot of good stuff here. So I'm good.
Awesome.
Nothing to add here.
No, I think it was great. And again, everybody just make sure to check out Jaap's website and his LinkedIn. Those are going to be linked in the description down below. And Jaap, I really appreciate you coming on today. I learned a couple new books that I got to check out. And I'm probably going to give you a call after this just to kind of sit down and maybe learn a little bit more about the kind of ongoing struggles we're having, because I kind of understand now how to get a business from 6 figures to 7, but going from 7 to 8 or 9, I know is something you can definitely help people with, and it's definitely a step we need to take soon. And we're not technically a trade, but again, I think that we're close enough in regards to that. I always think of IT as more of a trade than anything else. We're just the same thing as an electrician. We're just a little bit more dainty and sensitive. So, but yeah, so I really appreciate you coming on. Again, everybody make sure to check out the description below. Check out Jaap's website, check out his LinkedIn. Do you have any areas where people can kind of keep up to date with you other than those, just to see what you're posting, what you're talking about, what you're working on?
Well, LinkedIn is the platform that I'm on. Facebook, Instagram, not so much.
Fantastic. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing, and I'm really looking forward to our next conversation. So we'll see you soon.
Well, thank you, Jake, for having me. It was a great pleasure.
No worries. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
And I think that does it for today's video. If you could please leave a like on this video, it really helps us out. If you want to see more videos like this, then please hit subscribe. If you have a suggestion for a future video or a guest you'd like to see on the show, please leave a comment down below or email us at techtips@umbrellaitservices.ca. Have a great day and see you all soon.